Afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the AF Wednesday webinar. I'm Lee Oxborough, and I am the Crop Protection Procurement Manager, and I'll be your host for today. This month, we are talking about the future of crop protection and the direction it's heading. We've got a good array of knowledgeable speakers lined up to share their thoughts on the direction of crop protection and IPM. So please feel free to send in any questions into the chat as we go along. Before we begin, just a little bit of housekeeping for you. We are recording this session and it will be available later on online. Everyone except the speakers will be on mute. If you do have a question, please just add it to the chat and we'll get to you when we can. If we can't get to your questions, we will answer them and get back to you after the webinar, and each speaker gets around 10 minutes for their slot. So to start, I'm going to hand over to our very own Matt Keeley, and he's going to set the scene with some stats on the position we find ourselves in. So Matt, over to you.
Thanks, Lee, and good afternoon, everybody. So if you wouldn't mind popping my slides up. Brilliant. Really, it's just a couple of minutes from me just on where we are with some facts. So setting the scene, you'll have all seen this figure many times. Global population is predicted to exceed 9 billion by 2050. We're currently just shy of 8 billion people globally, so that's a lot more mouths to feed in the next 25 years. And globally, farmers lose 30 to 40% of their crops because of pests or diseases. So there's a necessity for crop protection in some shape or form. Quite a frightening figure is that since 2001, EU farmers have lost over half of the 850 registered active ingredients. And in terms of the UK, we're down to about 250 AIs, and that number is falling. To put that in context, there's about 3,000 products registered in the UK on CRD, and 260 of those are actually glyphosate. So nearly 10% of the products we have registered in the UK at the moment are actually glyphosate. And to register a new AI, a new active ingredient, from that eureka moment of synthesis, you're looking at 12 to 15 years, and a staggering figure of about 300 million plus to bring a new AI to the market. So that's a huge investment, and the R&D pipeline is without doubt getting thinner. Next one, please, Sophie. And so really our challenge as an industry is around global and national food security and stability. And it's never been more important than recent times, whereby over the last 2 years, we've seen huge instabilities in supply lines. And if we quote the Polish Prime Minister this week, we're now seeing the weaponizing of crops. And he cited Stalin's actions in Ukraine back in 1933. So I guess our challenge is how do we balance enriching our soils and biodiversity whilst feeding a global population with a decreasing toolbox of conventional, and I reiterate, conventional plant protection products. So I'm really looking forward to hearing the speakers today as to their views on things. So back over to you, Lee. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Certainly some food for thought there, and a really good question to hopefully answer with some of our speakers today. We're now going to move on to Neil Fuller. So Neil's an independent agronomist at Atlas Specialist Biosystem Services. Neil, how simple is it? Can we just swap into traditional? From traditional crop protection products into biological alternatives?
Short answer is yes. Could I have the slides, please, Sophie? That would be fantastic. So, hello everybody. Great to be here. Thanks for the opportunity to give you a quick presentation on the interactions of the biological bits with some of the chemical sides of things. First slide, please, Sophie. Go on. Yeah, brilliant. So I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about the biological fraction. We've got two bits we can play with in agriculture. There's the above ground bit and the below ground bit. They are actually linked, and what I wanted to do was give you a wee bit of a picture as to where they come from, what they're up to, and how the system works. So first slide's looking at what we would think of as the plant microbiome, and we're going to look at the below ground bit first. So the circle diagrams right in the middle. The bottom one is a section through a leaf. You can see the leaf structure on the left hand side and the root structure, not leaf structure. Apologize for that. Root structure with the root hairs coming out from it. The next circle diagram above it is actually showing the same section of root, but this time it's showing you that it's inhabited with lots and lots of beneficial bacteria. Now, what's happening is the green bit of the plant is catching sunlight, it's catching carbon, it's pushing that carbon, a lot of it, maybe a third or a fifth of its total carbon capture below ground and out through its roots to feed these microbes. Essentially, the microbes are feeding up, they're multiplying up, they're bringing nutrients back to the plant to encourage the plant to produce roots, and they're also working very closely with regard to producing chemicals that influence how the plant grows, how the plant resists climatic change, and how the plant defends itself. They're also busy building soil, that's the bottom right-hand corner, but the real bit is that this is a communication between the plant and the microbe, and the plant will change the composition of its exudates to encourage different types of microbes, and the microbes will change what they do to encourage the plant to grow and resist stress. Next slide, please, Sophie. So here's an example of this exact microbe in action. What it's doing is it's mimicking the root system in the potato crop, deliberately mixing live microbe with placement fertilizer. The plant is showing us a root response, tuber numbers, stems, and growth rates. And you can see that this is actually, although the microbe is put in at planting, the microbe is lifelong in terms of its association. So you've got systemic, acquired, microbe-mediated plant response. Sounds a bit of a mouthful, but what it's really doing is the plant is talking to the microbe is tickling the roots of the plant is laughing and getting happy. And the chart on the right-hand side shows you the yield response that we're getting, for example, in potatoes as a result of the live microbe in with placement fertilizer. Next slide, please, Sophie. It's not just about yield. We see changes in physiology. And again, going back to the circles on the left-hand side, you've got roots that look bare, and you've got roots that have got lots of side branches on. And those side branches are a direct response to the life in the soil or the applied microbe that's going in to the crop. Those root hairs are feeding microbes. Those microbes are then defending the plant. And what we're then seeing in the pictures, top right-hand side, these microbes are providing a defensive barrier against Streptomyces scabies, but they're changing the way the roots work in order to then deliver more calcium, more zinc, more boron to the plant. So that's helping us ward off things like hollow heart, internal rusting, growth cracks. It's boosting skin finish, fry quality, store quality. So there's lots of good things coming through there. And these microbes are absolutely compatible with conventional chemistry, conventional fertilizers. So it's not an either or system. Next slide, please, Sophie. Exciting bit for me, here's a product that we were developing many years ago for a major manufacturer. And this is where we begin to see the strength of the microbe in terms of genuine crop protection. This is the same microbe again. And to give you a little bit of a sideline, this microbe has been in agricultural service since 1848, when it was introduced by the Bayer company as a seed treatment for cereals. The very same microbe you're looking at now in tandem with an organic material, and the microbial bit is breaking down the organic bit, and the organic bit is presenting genuine biological control of potato cyst nematode. And it's not species sensitive. This is really effective. Trials at James Hutton Institute showing that it was hitting 99+% efficacy. And the really neat thing about it is yield responses, as we've just seen, but the breakdown products, simply CO2 and water, no issue with residues at all. Next slide, please, Sophie. So you've just looked at the below ground bit in terms of microbes being added to soils and seed stocks. This is the above ground bit. This is the cereals, introducing the microbe and a little bit of support nutrition in the foliar canopy for your T0, T1, T2 spraying. Bottom pictures, the left-hand side is showing small plot trials. Each one of those plots is 4 meters by 20 meters. You've got 4 separate varieties in there. And the right-hand side image is remote sensing using linear red edge to identify stress in the plant. The plots are getting different levels of fungicide, different levels of biological, and I'm going to give you a couple of charts just to show how this responds. Next slide, please, Sophie. Thank you, that's brilliant. So the chart on the left-hand side is for variety 1 and variety 3 that you've just looked at, showing the yield response as it builds. From the left-hand side, that's seed and fertilizer only. Then we introduce the T0, then it's T0 plus T1, T0, T1, T2, T3, nutrition, biological. You can see the yield is stepping up quite nicely, really strong correlation between input and yield, input and grain quality. The chart on the right-hand side is showing us the impact on carbon footprint. And this is one of my pet subjects at the moment. As we drive plant health, as we drive plant performance, we may add a little bit in terms of our carbon burn per hectare, but the yield response we get is actually dropping our carbon footprint per ton. That's really good news in terms of hitting our net zero carbon ambition, but it's also really good news in terms of the economics, our unit cost of production, and in terms of our requirement through supply chains to provide lower carbon feedstocks for all our major brands. Next slide, please, Sophie. So integration, what we need to remember is these are live microbes. They do struggle a little bit when conditions work against them. So one of the important bits is to feed the crop to make sure the crop can communicate well with the microbes. Image on the left-hand side is showing you plants with low potassium, low magnesium in the center, and you can see the impact that's then got on the root side of things. Now, if we reduce the roots, we reduce the ability for the plant to communicate with those microbes. So the impact of what might cost us quite a bit of money to actually introduce the live microbe may not perform quite as well if we don't feed the plant itself. Easy to fix, a couple of litres of good quality nutrition through the foliage would really sort that out quite nicely. We need to keep an eye on environmental stresses, heat, drought, moisture, manage the crop accordingly to get the best out of the biology. And the other little bit I just wanted to mention is moving forward down the route of regenerative agriculture for major agricultural feedstocks. We're moving more towards the right-hand images there, where we're growing, for example, spring malting barley undersown with clover. In that kind of situation, the biological bit is doing all the heavy lifting, and we're really looking at a near zero chemical input. We're using the chemistry as and when we need to, but we're delivering quality and quantity for specific requirements. Next slide, please, Sophie. This should be the last one from me. Just as a summary, the bullet points, what we need to remember, we need to understand the process. It's live, it's biological, and it does struggle a little bit. We do need to pick the right biological for the right task. Every manufacturer will tell you their product is magnificent, and it might be if it's applied to sugarcane in Brazil, but it might struggle on sugar beet in Aberdeen. We need to think about supplementing rather than substituting. So these guys are going to integrate with our conventional agronomy, not replace it at least in the initial instances. We do need to be proactive. These biologicals need to be in front of the challenge. If you want to use the defensive capabilities of the biology, we need to have them in place before the challenge comes in. And the other thing is to manage expectations. These things are variable. They sometimes work, they sometimes don't. We need to understand a little bit more about how we integrate them with conventional agronomy. But for me, there's real positivity about hitting a nice path, regen ag if you want to, but with or without our chemistry, with or without our microbes. It's a great future, great time to be an agronomist, great time to be a farmer, lots of really exciting stuff coming through. So the short answer from me, yes, biology really can play a part. Thank you ever so much for listening. I'll hand you back to the studio. Any questions, by all means, sing out. If not, I'll have a great rest of the day.
Neil, thank you very much indeed for that. A fascinating insight there. I do have a couple of questions for you, Neil, if you don't mind. You mentioned happy plants. Will we have happy growers for the cost of this strategy?
Short answer is yes. Some of these microbes are really, really easy to manufacture. They're the sorts of things that we can do at low scale, but volume up really quickly. Cost of production is actually really quite small in terms of application and in terms of handling. They are neat products. There are no operator exposure issues, very compatible with conventional agronomy. We, for example, will mix a lot of live microbe in with placement fertilizers for root crops, and cost is not prohibitive.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Just one more for you there, Neil. How much uptake have you seen kind of in the UK for your strategy here?
It's really quite exciting. There's been quite a sea change since COP26, where the real focus has been on not just talking about net zero, but really delivering on net zero. And the biological bit is a major component of strategies moving forward for the brands. The brands are pulling this idea of decarbonising agricultural feedstocks rather than policy pushing the idea. So it's really accelerating. It's really working quite hard. There's a lot of interesting engagement with the major manufacturers. There's a lot of farm interest. And the neat bit about it is it would appear everybody walks away a winner. Soil gets better, crop gets better, food gets better, consumer has more choice, cost of production is under control, environmental issues are addressed, and brands have a really sweet story to tell. So lots of good stuff.
Brilliant. Sounds like a very positive approach. Thanks very much for that, Neil. Now we'll move over to Matt. Matt is an agronomy manager for McCain's GB. He's very busy today, back-to-back meetings. So thank you very much for joining us, Matt. He's kindly agreed to come on board and give us an insight into biopesticides and the alternatives to conventional chemistry options in potatoes. Matt, welcome.
Okay. Thank you very much. So I'm Matt Small, as I say, I'm agronomy manager for McCain Foods in GB, and also support the wider global team in agronomy. I've been in potatoes for over 25 years in various research and commercial roles. So the question that I think they wanted me to address is will McCain as a processor, will we incentivize growers to use biological products going forward? So McCain is globally committed to a wide sustainability strategy of planet-friendly food, essentially. Key to that is their commitment within agriculture. And we're just in the process of rolling out now our regenerative agriculture platform and framework, and we are committed to 100% of our area, supplied area in GB being regenerative by 2030. As part of this commitment, there's various options within regen, and we're also taking a wider approach of the whole rotation, which has to be regen, not just potatoes themselves. But as part of this area that we are committed to reduce the toxicity of pesticides, and obviously therefore incentivize the use of biologicals. Now, our approach to that is that the supply base, we need to adapt to this if and when the chemistry is available and reliable enough in order to reduce the risk for growers of taking this up. We can't afford to step backwards in terms of yield. I mean, as the previous speaker alluded to, carbon footprint, the biggest way we drive carbon footprint and drive towards net zero is to maintain our current yields. We can't, that is the biggest area, and actually increase them. So therefore, we have to do that, and I have a wide screening and testing process, both internally and with independents externally, because this is an area that up until now has been very market driven, and not there. And I think really we're at the infancy of biologicals as well. I mean, a lot of the big agrochemical players have only just got involved in this field. And and if you think how long it's taken us to get to where we are with synthetic pesticides, so I say, I think let's judge, where biologicals will get to in probably 5 years' time rather than now. I mean, initially, I would say that the state of where we're at the minute is, I think many biologicals are, useful additions to the use of synthetic and conventional chemistry at the minute, rather than actual replacements. I mean, obviously, one of the biggest areas we've seen, movement in is obviously in the Bacillus subtilis sort of area that we've seen now. Would I recommend a grower today to go out and apply that, that biological instead of applying, something like Amistar, for instance, for soil-borne rhizotonia? Then, we are not seeing the same level of efficacy. And then you will not see the results. Now we've seen niche areas that chemistry can be used for, that it's quite interesting. I mean, other areas that we see coming through on the pesticide side, I mean, I'll address the biological side that the previous speaker talked about in a second. But I mean, those sort of areas that we are seeing, obviously we're seeing like the phosphites, which are coming in as to help blight control. Having said that, that is going to be in combination with existing chemistry. And so therefore, will it actually be seen as a biological? Can it actually stand alone as a plant elicitor? At the minute, it's not. And a lot of these soil-borne options as well, that actually, yes, at a pot experiment basis, you see a lot of these substances, and many of these, many of these substances actually were origin for existing chemistry in many cases. But as soon as you put it into the wider environment, and we see this with both foliar applied and soil applied at the minute, that it is quite a aggressive environment for those quite weak pathogen type based and fungi type based products to actually survive it. And so, that there is a doubt, but I think, there is mass screening programs going on out there. And I think, we will see a day where biologicals will come up, to match the existing chemistry. And as they do, then we will, we will incentivize growers in order to use it. I mean, the other area, as I say, is trying to get a response, physiological response out of the plant from using some of these biologicals. And again, it's very much at its infancy. We've seen lots of claims for products, and obviously we've had the likes of seaweed products, etc., for a long time. And again, and I think the previous speaker also alluded to this. The problem is at the minute is really understanding. It's wrong to say that they're not working. They are having an effect on the plant. Can we at the minute predict exactly what that effect is and when it's going to happen, and for them to actually be a reliable enough effect to recommend for growers to actually use? I don't think we're quite there yet. And there's one or two products where I've seen some interesting results, but it is difficult to repeat those results. You see a one-off effect in a single year, and until I can really identify areas where you see a consistent response year after year, and you can have some idea that the grower is going to get a response from spending that money, then I think it's still work in progress. So I think that's my main thing. I think it's an evolving picture. I think the future is probably very exciting, but that future is probably going to be sometime in the next 5 years, I would say.
Great stuff, Matt. Thank you very much. You described it there as useful additions to alternatives. What needs to happen, and by who, to make it kind of more of its own element? Does it need to be driven by chemical companies, by farmers?
I think we're seeing, I mean, in order to develop a synthetic, and it's synthetic, chemical with the correct efficacy, you're talking about a massive investment. And I think that sort of massive investment and investment in screening. I mean, what's going on at the minute is, there's mass screening programs going on, but it's a bit like winning the lottery. Nobody knows exactly what they're looking for, and they're just screening all these products. And sometimes it's difficult to screen in as many areas as they might have an effect. So it's just a case of looking for a needle in a haystack at the minute, and then how big that needle is. That's how I described it at the minute, and I think that sort of thing can only, and we are seeing it. We are seeing, it is becoming increasingly difficult to get new chemistry approved and through the registration process. And I think we are seeing that the large agrochemical companies react to that and put probably as much money into biological programs as they are in conventional chemistry. So I think that is bound to come through.
Excellent.
Eventually, I would say.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much for that, Matt. Greatly appreciated. And I know you've got a really busy day ahead of you. So thanks very much for your time.
Okay.
So following on from alternatives to conventional chemistry, we now move across to hear from one of our members, Tom Clark of TWH Clark & Son, based in Ely, Cambridgeshire. Tom has been very proactive and working hard in utilising IPM and the release of beneficials as an alternative to conventional crop protection. Unfortunately, Tom isn't available for us today, but he very kindly agreed to join us yesterday for a video call. And so we're now going to play that. Please enjoy some explanation on the work he's been doing and the challenges he's faced. Apologies for this, the classic technical issues. We're just fixing that as we speak. If you bear with us one moment, we should be good to go. So technology has failed us there. We'll keep working on that, but we'll move on for now. So I would have said thank you very much, Tom, but we'll share that with you when we can. So continuing on the theme of kind of on-farm trials, we move across to Dominic Swan. So Dominic is the farm data manager for the Catalyst Farming Group, and he's joined us today to talk about their own on-farm trials and how data-driven from weather stations and disease forecasting is helping to tailor crop inputs. So over to you, Dominic.
Thank you. Share my screen. Can you see that?
Yeah, all good.
So yeah, Catalyst Farming. So we're 4 farming companies collaborating, working together in Norfolk, trying to become better farmers through sharing our data, collecting data, analysing it, and sharing it to the whole farm team to improve the way we're farming. So sort of the basic principles and aims we're trying to achieve together would be increasing our output, quite simply put, increasing our yield, improving the quality of the product. So whether it's malting barley, making sure we've got low grain nitrogen, for wheat, increasing the grain protein. Reducing inputs would be the third aim for us, whether that's fertilizers, plant protection products, cultivation, labor, time. And then finally, reducing our environmental impact, or even better than that, trying to improve the environment we're working in. All these aims are slightly interlinked, so we don't want to improve one if it means having a negative impact on another. So we don't just want to increase yield if that means potentially having a negative impact on the environment. So quite a task. And trying to do this, like I said, through the use of data and sharing that data in the group to learn. So looking at plant protection products, I'm just going to go through one of the fungicide trials we ran last year in a crop of winter wheat drilled on the 15th September, a variety called Firefly, drilled at 110 kilos a hectare, which achieved 170 plants per metre squared. On the edge of this field, we have a weather station. We have 8 weather stations in the group spread across the farms. The weather station's collecting information like temperature, humidity, precipitation, leaf wetness, radiation, wind speed, soil temperature and moisture, a few other things. But it's also able to model disease and predict the likelihood of a disease infection. And then in that field, we have a small plot at the top of the field, which we applied no fungicides to at all. A 2-hectare plot that we tried to follow the weather station's disease models and tailoring our fungicide inputs to that. And then another part of the field where we took our farm standard fungicide program and then increased and decreased the rates of that fungicide program to see what effect that would have on our yield. So then looking at the yield monitor, all the combines in the group have yield monitors, which makes these sorts of trials quite easy to do. We found where we applied no fungicides at all, we achieved a yield of 3.8 tonnes a hectare. Where we followed the weather station and the disease modelling, we achieved a yield of 8.1 tonnes per hectare. And then across the rest of the field, and where we changed the rates of the farm standard fungicide program, we were nearer 9 tonnes a hectare. So when ultimately you bring that together to produce a gross margin, looking at the crop output minusing the cost of the inputs, with our farm standard program based around Delaticea at T1 and Revastar at T2, quite a robust fungicide program costing £130 a hectare. Our economic optimum was was best at the 75% rate for when wheat is 180 to 200 pounds a tonne. No, we didn't really find any yield difference between the 75 and 100% fungicide rates. Slight drop off at 50% and a slight increase at 125%. For the 125% rate to have been the economic optimum, the wheat price would have to be £325 a tonne, which at the moment is quite easily achieved. But at the time this was done, these were more realistic wheat prices. Where we followed the weather station and the disease modelling early on in the growing season, the models suggested very low levels of septoria and quite unlikely for any infection to occur. So instead of an Delaticea at T1, we just used tebuconazole just to keep the rust at bay. And it was only around T2 was there any sign of septoria becoming an issue. So then we did introduce Revastar, but again at a slightly lower rate than farm standard. This did save a fair bit of money on the fungicide program compared to the farm standard, but we were quite a long way behind on yield, and that really had an impact on the gross margin, resulting in the lowest gross margin across any of the trials. So yeah, it didn't really work. And I think probably the main reason for this is that most of the chemistry we're using is protectant chemistry. It's not curative, so you need that chemistry to be on before the infection occurs, whereas the weather stations are looking at information that has occurred, looking at whether that has already happened, and is telling you whether the infection has happened. At that point, it's too late for the chemistry to do anything. So the technology is not quite there reliably to predict infection. So unfortunately, on large scale and on productive land, we're finding our best returns from a prophylactic treatment. However, we do rely on genetic disease tolerance, so using good varieties with disease resistance, and also using rotation to our advantage to help reduce those levels of disease. And then the last bit would be the timings of the inputs, like fungicides, making sure your timings are as close to perfect as possible, as I think this increases the efficacy of the product by a long way.
Excellent stuff. Thank you very much, Dominic. I have a question come across my desk. So what aims of the Catalyst Group for insecticides? So you've showed us what how you're working with fungicides. Are you doing the same with insecticides or herbicides, or?
So yeah, we are certainly. It's slightly different for each partner in the group. Some have more of an agenda to really go without insecticides and have achieved that now for 2 years without any great negative effects. We have done a couple of insecticide trials as well, particularly for cabbage stem flea beetle, where we're finding the insecticide has no effect on the flea beetle and sometimes even a negative effect. So for oilseed rape, it's been quite an easy decision in the last few years that we haven't applied any insecticide. And then, that's where we're going, really.
Excellent. And working on this thesis, can you see yourself introducing any of the biological approaches that have been previously talked about in the slides?
Yeah, definitely. I'd love to try some. Again, they'll just be on trials on the farm. It might not work for us straight away, but we'll try it again. But they all have to return on investment, really, at the end of the day.
Good stuff. Well, I'm sure some of the guys will be keen to chat to you. Thanks very much, Dominic. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
So moving on now, we finalise our journey with our last guest speaker. We've got Dr. Jake Richards, the Agricultural Sustainability Manager for Sainsbury's Supermarket. So Jake, thank you very much for joining us today. Although supermarkets are towards the end of the food supply chain, they are a driving voice in it. Can you share with us what role Sainsbury's and retailers have in the future of crop protection?
Thank you, Lee. Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to join you. It really is a pleasure to be here and to give you an insight into what Sainsbury's is working on at the moment. So as you've said, I'm the relatively new addition to the Sainsbury's agriculture team as Ag Manager for Sustainability. Prior to working with Sainsbury's, I worked for the NFU and previously to that in crop science and research for BBRO, but I also have an agricultural background from a farm in Suffolk. So part of my role working with is to work with Sainsbury's suppliers and partners in the wider industry to help embed some of the sort of more sustainable agricultural practices into our supply chains. And the other side of my role is to also work as the link between our suppliers and the technical and buying teams within Sainsbury's. So it's a bit of a conduit, but also gives me an interesting perspective on what we're doing and what influence we can have on the supply chain as well. So I do this as part of, well, potentially one of the larger agriculture teams that the retailers have in the UK. We have around 20, a team of 20 doing similar work to me, but across all the different crops and livestock. And as I say, we also work quite closely with our technical managers who have a much more in-depth knowledge of the particular crop, say for potatoes, for example. So Sainsbury's is, of course, one of the big four supermarkets, and you probably don't need me to name them, but we account for around 15% of the food we eat at home in the UK. We take produce from UK, EU and actually worldwide, but we pride ourselves in safe, nutritious and sustainable food at affordable prices. Now, our ultimate ambition that you might have seen or heard Stephen Fry mention on the TV or radio recently is to help everyone eat better. And part of that is helping our suppliers farm better for the planet. So to briefly touch on crop protection at Sainsbury's, and I really can't comment on any other retailers, but crop protection is a key part of the work we do with our suppliers. We ask our suppliers to conform to the Sainsbury's Crop Protection Code of Practice, which has been constructed by our resident agronomist, Ron Stobart, who I'm sure many of you will have come across during his time at Sainsbury's, but also previously at NIAB as well. So having Ron in the team is an asset, as it really gives both Sainsbury's and suppliers confidence that the approach we take will be very pragmatic towards crop protection and actually what we can achieve. It's probably quite important to note that something that's very important to us is to maintain supply. So we would much rather work long term with our suppliers to make sure that everything works best, both for them, us, our customers, but ultimately the longer term supply chain. But we're confident that the code of practice is very robust, and we review it periodically, sort of every 3 to 5 years, to make sure that it's up to date with any changes that are going on in the industry. So that code of practice is standard across all countries that we source from, and our suppliers are required to undertake residue testing and report that to us. And really the theory behind that is to make sure that we are both conforming to local legislation in a particular country, but also making sure that those residues are at an appropriate level for human health. But crucially, it follows both GB legislation and what's going on in our suppliers' countries. So, as I think I've already mentioned, we like to take a very collaborative approach with our suppliers, and we hold regular crop action group meetings. For example, we have a potatoes crop action group. These meet a number of times a year to discuss trends in residue data and forecast any industry changes that are about to happen. But it also allows us to look at long-term supply and sort of horizon scanning on the challenges that are going to be faced by our suppliers as well. But equally, these feed into wire grow in interaction groups, which are much more broad and focus on subjects like soil health and things like that, and some of the more sustainability pieces as well. So it's really quite tight knit. We want to help our suppliers sort of progress at a level that they're able to, but also our customers will accept. So what is the direction of travel? Well, it shouldn't be any surprise to say that as an industry, we're heading towards a push for more integrated pest management. You may have seen that certain retailers in Europe have opted to take an approach of limiting the number of active ingredients that you're able to use at a particular on a particular crop. As I've already said, we take a much more pragmatic view of that, and really our goal is to make sure that there are as many tools in the box as possible. But that does mean using actives alongside IPM and biocontrol where possible. But we think it's important to note that a supply of safe and nutritious food is a priority alongside protecting the environment. So that's why we work so closely with our suppliers to achieve that. So as I've said, in future, I think we're likely to see a greater focus on soil health in the agronomic sense. So making sure we're able to protect and enhance our soils at the same time as food production and food supply. We do have to think of soils as a means of getting our food rather than purely delivering for the environment, although it is a priority to do that as well. I'm quite keen to emphasise the fact that we will continue to take a very pragmatic approach to the use of plant protection products in our supply chain. Equally, we're very keen to make a genuine difference to the environment, and that does require us to look at alternative approaches. We are very proud of the fact we have a strong track record in funding and translating research into on-farm practice. We've worked across research and suppliers to sort of push biocontrol in the potato supply chain, but also in orchards and soft fruit. Now there's a lot of work being done in sustainable crop management, and I think it's safe to say we'll continue to help translate that through our supply chain. Obviously, it's not quite as simple in all crops as using beneficial insects in soft fruit, but we're keen to use the shared learnings and some of the research that's going on across some of the institutes to really bring that into the supply chain and field veg as well. But to conclude, I think it's important to highlight that while many people will be thinking that because of the hyperinflation we're seeing and the situation in Ukraine and Russia, food security and affordability is rightly rising to the top of the agenda. But I think it's important to point out that unlike during previous global crises where environmental sustainability and issues have almost fallen by the wayside, this time round it remains an absolute priority for customers. So going forward, working with our supply chain on crop protection and the wider environmental agenda is extremely important to us.
It's good to hear, Jake. Thank you very much indeed. Just a quick question that I've got for you. Retailers incentivizing coming away from traditional crop protection programs and kind of utilizing some of the aforementioned strategies. Is that something you can see coming, in the future?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I can't comment on anyone other than Sainsbury's. Our priority is to make sure that our suppliers have as many tools in the box, whether that be biologicals, traditional chemistry. I don't think we'll be looking at limiting the number of products you can use on a particular crop, like some of the European retailers have done. And as I say, I think that's really a function of us having a fairly pragmatic approach and a fairly strong agriculture team as well.
Good stuff. Thank you very much, Jake. I've got a question here. Sorry, I've just lost it. Potatoes or fruit, which crop is next on the agenda for driving sustainability in IPM?
I mean, fruit has always been a key area that we can test some of this stuff out, purely because it's a lot easier to test biologicals in polytunnel settings. Potatoes is a major product for us. I think we'll probably see some work being done in both of those areas. I know the fruit work is ongoing, but potatoes is obviously both at the forefront of our minds, but also customers as well. So you're probably spot on with both of those guesses.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed, Jake. That's great. Thanks to hear. Great to hear from you, and thank you very much for your time. I'm just waiting if we've got any other questions coming through on the chat for any of the speakers. And I'm just waiting to hear if we're going to go back to the live video. We'll try one more time with the Tom Clark piece. It's really interesting stuff, so it'd be really good to share it with you. If you just bear with us, we'll see if we can stitch that in now. Again, Tom, thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for having me.
No worries at all. No worries. So, Tom, you are actually doing some of this IPM on the ground. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing and the methods you're using, please?
Yeah, so I guess IPM isn't just one thing. It's a whole suite of things that you could do. And some of the crops which we've grown here, I'm fourth generation farmer and I took over about 12, 13 years ago. And to start with, I was farming very much like my dad had farmed, and it was you know, ploughing every field always, and sowing things by the date of the calendar, and using the same crops in the same way, and spraying them whether they needed to be sprayed or not, kind of thing. Not that he was a bad farmer, but it was just that's the way it was done. So over the time I've been in charge of the farm, I think I've started to question whether that's the right way of doing things. And the price of things at the moment, chemicals, fertilizers, seed, even everything is getting so expensive. Machinery, do you need to do all the extra passes and everything? So it's partly from economics, trying to find better, more efficient ways of doing things. And actually nature can do an awful lot. And the decisions you take about what you do on your farm isn't set in stone. You do have choice. You don't have to grow all the same crops. You don't have to spray them regardless. And that's where it starts. Then we're faced with some specific problems. For example, I think everyone will, especially out in the east, will be aware of sugar beet, and the fact that it used to be a bankable crop. Everyone used to get a guaranteed cornerstone of the rotation, and it was almost a guaranteed yield. And that changed because we lost the neonicotinoid seed treatment, which had been protecting the crop from aphids, which transmit yellow virus disease to the crop and can devastate yields. And we had been relying on those neonicotinoid seed treatments so completely that they were the only option. They were the only thing that was keeping the crop going. And when they had gone, suddenly we had nothing left. And we have to start thinking about how are we going to grow these crops when we don't have these seed treatments. They're uneconomic to grow without when you can't rely on the yields that you used to get with them, that they suddenly become uneconomic to grow. Now, part of that can be addressed by getting paid more for them, but the risk is so great it can go up or down in any one year. So I started looking at what else we could do. And so, for example, last couple of years, I've been running trials with introducing predatory insects into the sugar beet crops, so they're there already ready to eat, basically to hunt out and eat all these aphids before they could infect the crop. And then also in later years, looking at how we could feed those insects, because the native insects don't come in as quickly as they need to, and that's why, and the aphids, because they're transmitting a disease, they only have to bite the plants once and they have transmitted the disease. So you really have to have something there ready to stop them straight away. So we're looking at maybe feeding these predatory insects in the crop ahead of the aphids migrating into the crop, and that is something that is done in glass houses and in horticulture quite a lot, but really hasn't ever been tried in a broad acre situation in open fields. And this would be the third year of the trial, and we're still not there. We still haven't got our head around the quantities and the way we put it in and all of this, and therefore we still haven't got really good results. So a lot of this thing is quite a hard slog. But then there's other things as well. There's like the time of the year that you drill, and and the choice of variety that you put in. There's now another thing I'm doing on the farm is using camouflage. So the aphids look out for sugar beet seedlings against the sort of dark soil background. And actually we are growing a nurse crop of barley over the top of the sugar beet to sort of hide it away. And we're doing that in strips and seeing if there's going to be any difference. And that was something we used to do a lot for protecting against wind erosion in our sugar beet crops. But now we're doing it on all of our soil types, just as a way to protect them against the aphids. So that's another thing we're trying. We're also trying some novel topical applications of things that might repel aphids and stuff. So there's lots of different ways of doing it. And then there's what you're expecting. If you're always expecting to get 100 tons a hectare off your sugar beet, maybe actually you need to budget for less than that, because you need to accept that the climate's not always going to be exactly as it used to be. We might not get frosts in the winter. We might get very wet autumns and stuff. And actually you have to say, well, if I can't make this crop work at, say, half or 2/3 of the yield I used to get, then really maybe I should be growing less of it and growing more of something else. So it really does come down to there's some new gizmos and tricks and new solutions in bags and bottles and things like that. But actually, it's your whole philosophy of the way you approach the farming is actually don't try and farm against what is the likelihoods of what nature can supply and what things are going to be thrown at you, and actually try and work out on a more sort of common sense basis that, yeah, this isn't working, I've got to do something different.
Absolutely. And Tom, I know you said you've been trialing over the last kind of 2-3 years. Very, very difficult subject, and probably quite a difficult question from me, but dare I ask, what have been your biggest challenges?
Well, I mean, I think the uncertainty is really a big thing, and you don't, because we tried, we were very excited the first year. We did a sort of late trial with these predatory insects, and it was a bit too late, and we couldn't really tell. So the next year we were ready to do it much more properly, and actually last year, this is now 2021 I'm talking about, was actually a much more quote normal year. We got quite a cold winter, and actually we didn't get the disease pressure. So we were all set up to do this amazing trial with these predatory, and actually we didn't get any results because we didn't get any virus in the field. So everything takes so long, and because you're waiting so long, such a lot of things can happen to you in the meantime. Like now, fertilizer's gone up, and all the other challenges we're facing. So the unpredictability is the biggest challenge, and the extremes that we now can face. The fact that the weather's not behaving like it should and used to, and financially, of course, we're losing subsidies and things like that. So some of that security blanket is being pulled away. So I guess that is the new reality. That's what we have to be comfortable with and work out what our responses are going to be. And I think IPM is a key part of that, because that is basically, it's a philosophy, it's an approach, rather than expecting not to have to change at all and being grumpy when things don't go right. You just got to be ready for anything and have a sort of flexible, responsive way of mitigating against that sort of volatility.
Absolutely. And you mentioned finances there. So in terms of offsetting insecticide prices and costs against your beneficials and your insect introduction, is there some work that you've done there in terms of seeing the difference?
Yeah, so the very first year I did it, I split a field into two and asked the company that breeds these things for glass houses to supply me with enough insects that would match the spend if I was buying them, match the spend with the insecticide, and then the other half of the field they put in their recommended, which was more, and we could see a slight difference. The more you put on, the bigger the result. So then it would be more expensive than using insecticides. But then you've got questions about effectiveness. I mean, a lot of these, because once we don't have the seed treatments to protect the crops, you have to spray on top, and especially in the fens where I farm, it's often you don't get spray windows. You have to notice when they're in the crop. You have to be monitoring the crop, and of course you have to guarantee they don't get resistance to the insecticide. So actually maybe spraying isn't actually going to be as effective. So maybe you could justify spraying a bit more for a solution that was effective. And then because it's totally new and it's not been done in like broadacre crops before, the economics of it aren't now what they might be if everybody was doing it. I mean, there would be economies of scale, and the application technologies would be tried and tested, and actually it might well be a lot cheaper. So it's very hard to work out now if it would be a massively economic solution. It's not on the shelf ready to go solution. So in a way, I guess I'm not saying I'm a pioneer exactly, but I'm trying things out before they're ready to see if they work or could work in the future.
Yeah, quite
for
right.
Other people, really. Yeah.
Superb. And you just mentioned there you are one of the first to kind of be doing this. And since you have been looking more into beneficials and IPM, have you noticed more people kind of taking an interest and drumming up, thinking about doing it on their own farm?
Yeah, there's definitely more interest in it. And it was, if not introducing predatory insects, then farming in a way which encourages more of the native insects to be predatory, and it extends to other things as well, other crops. So, for example, in wheat, I'm trialing blends rather than straight varieties, because then the theory is that they are more resistant to fungal disease, and you don't spend so much on fungicide because there's variety within the field. They don't also come to the same strains, or so there's there's a lot more of that sort of stuff going on, and those things are more accessible for farmers. There's little changes that you can make, and you can try in one field 1 year and sort of feel your way in a sort of like step-by-step kind of way, rather than some big bang change of system entirely. And I think that is what we've got to do. We've got to learn from each other, so people can see if what I do is stupid or if it actually works in the end. But also then, you know, a little bit of experimentation on your own farms too.
Yeah, perfect. Now, I dare say this is a subject that we could talk about for quite a while, Tom, but I think we're running out of time. So can I just ask you, if we have some questions from some of the members and other listeners, are we okay to contact you and you know, we'll
Absolutely. Yeah, very happy to answer any questions. Send them in to AF and I'll email you back.
Fantastic.
I'm sorry I couldn't be there today. Thanks for recording.
Thanks very much for coming. Thanks for your time. Thanks, Tom. Cheers.
No problem. Bye.
Bye-bye. I'm sure you'll all agree some really fascinating forward-thinking practices going on in Tom's farm there. So that's it. That wraps us up. In summary, I think we've heard some good buzzwords. It's an exciting future ahead. It's a good time to be a farmer or an agronomist. We've seen some good evidence of farmers fine-tuning crop protection, and the supermarkets want less chemicals in your brand. So all in all, a good time to be a member of AF. So to wrap things up, thank you very much to everyone for joining us today. Thank you to our speakers. Hopefully we'll catch some of you at some of the forthcoming shows in the agricultural world, groundswell, cereals, etc. And please do get in touch if you have any queries or questions. Yeah, thanks very much indeed.